Now this right here, okay, may end up being a test question. Okay. And we're talking about what surplus food actually leads to, or what farming leads to. I'm going to go back to the diagram for a second. Okay. I want to show you this. We were looking at this on Friday briefly. Okay. Notice that everything comes out of agriculture or farming. Once people are farming, then you've got surplus food, meaning that not everybody needs to be a farmer. We've got more than we need. No, we don't need you to go be a farmer. We need you, Morgan, to go figure out a way. How are we going to store this extra food? Okay. What are we going to do? How can we do it? We talked about it on Friday. What could you do? Can someone help her out? How can you store extra grain? What? What'd you say? Where can you put the extra grain?
Somewhere cool and dry, like maybe a silo.
Okay, a silo. Back then they were we would use the term was in granary. Okay, what's the root word for granary? Granary. Grain. Okay, and as far as what is a grain, it's just usually some kind of basically a box shaped thing. It was usually built up off the ground. Why do you think it's kept off the ground?
So then like absorb moisture.
That's exactly right. Okay, if it's on the ground, it can absorb moisture, and then your grain begins to mold and rot and so forth. So they kept it off the ground, but they do keep it sealed also because they don't want rodents and other things like that getting in there. Okay, think about in your home. In your home, where do you keep the flour or the sugar or maybe the salt?
Somewhere cool and dry.
Yeah. A container. Okay, a container. Okay. What do you think they're using for containers back then? Are they using plastic back then? What are they using?
Like textiles.
Ceramics is pretty. That's going to be a little more advanced, but you're on the right track though. What? Pottery. Good. We need you to go learn how to make pots. Okay, out of clay. Okay. All right. And so that will be your skill. You don't need to farm. Okay. We need someone else to build us a granary. Okay, maybe a carpenter or a bricklayer or something like that. Okay, a stone worker possibly. Oh, you know what may happen though? We've got tell me, think about this. If you've got a box full of valuables like food, what might happen to your box of valuables? It might get stolen. So we need to put some guards, okay, around our granary possibly, okay? All right. So the guards won't be farming. That's their job. They're going to be guards. What do guards need? Oh, they need weapons. So now we need somebody to go learn how to work with metal to give them some spears or swords or something like that. Okay. So you see, but all this comes up out of agriculture right here. Okay. Um, and so back to this question right here. Okay. This is how it's going to be. You're going to see it. Okay. You're going to see first off, farming and surplus food. Then that leads to more people. That leads to specialization of labor, like people learning how to make pots and metal tools. Some people's jobs will be deemed more important than others. Anybody can farm, but not everybody can be a blacksmith, a metallurgist. And so that metallurgist might have a higher position in society than a farmer. When you've got extra stuff, you can possibly trade it with others who don't have it. Now, can you tell me, you're a farmer, you're growing your food, so you've got your food to eat. Why do we have a granary? If you're growing food and you can eat your food, why do we also need a granary?
Turn the grain
That way people that don't farm can have stuff to eat.
Okay, so people who don't farm can have stuff to eat. Okay. What else? Yes.
feed livestock.
Okay, to feed livestock. What else? Okay, so what happens if there's a drought, or a plague of locusts come in, or something like that, or whatever it might be, and all of a sudden, what you're growing at home isn't growing anymore. Okay, well now we got a backup plan. We don't have to starve. We can go to the granary. But wait a minute, how did the grain get in the granary? Oh, from the farmer. So whenever you ask people to pitch in, they just always do it, right? Yes.
No.
When you say, "Hey guys, we're taking up a collection," does everybody? Oh sure. Let me. They just follow. Do they do that? Okay. Some people are like, "Oh, I don't have it right now. I just can't do it." Okay. I left my wallet at home. Okay. All right. But if if people don't contribute to the granary, we might end up starving. If people are going to be selfish and they just want to eat everything that they grow, and then later on, if there's a drought, then they also want to go to the granary, that's not fair. Okay. What do we need to do? What do you do with these people who want to be moochers? You could kick them out. That's right. But who's going to kick them out, though? That's what I'm getting at here. How do you make people do things they don't want to do, like contribute and help out?
Or taxes. They,
Okay, well, okay, taxes, but wait a minute. Do people want to pay taxes? Okay, but so there we go again. You need, what are you going to do to make people pay their taxes or do things that they don't want to do because they don't think it's in their self interest? Yes. What? Put laws in place. Okay. Where are the laws going to come from? Oh, leaders. Okay. Government. Okay. That's what we're getting at right here. You're gonna need government to make people do things they may not want to do, like pay taxes, which by the way, the taxes would be the grain, okay, contributing to the grain right there. Okay. And don't forget though, okay, because we know what Uzo's gonna do. Okay. When we come to Uzo and say, hey Uzo, it's time for you to pay your share of grain, he's gonna say, I paid last week. Yeah, that other guy. Yeah, I gave him my grain. Okay. Well, wait a minute. Now we're confused. What do we need? He says he paid last week. Oh, okay. There we go. We got to have a record to keep track of folks like Uzo right here. Okay, he's sneaky like that. Okay, all right, and maybe he did pay last week. Okay, it's in his interest too that we have a written record, and that's what we're talking about, guys. Okay, taxes lead to writing because you need and not writing like poetry. Eventually, yeah, sure, you'll get to poetry and things and songs and stories, but first we got to have a way to keep track of who's paid and who owes. Okay, and so that's what we're talking about right here. That everything came out of farming first, though. Okay, first you're farming, then you get extra food, then you get more people. Then they specialize. Some people are higher up and some people are lower down. Trade, government, taxes, writing. Okay. It's kind of a chronological order, kind of a cause and effect type thing. Okay, moving on here. The best that we know, farming first got started in what's area called Mesopotamia. Where is Mesopotamia? Yes, sir. Good. Okay, that's the heart of it. Iraq is the heart of it. Um, Notice the word Mesopotamia. What other words start off with Meso? Okay, good enough. Yeah, Mesoamerica. Do y'all know what Meso means? Middle or between. Okay, uh, that word Mesopotamia, it's actually comes from the Greeks. They and that they that word Mesopotamia means between the two rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates, the two rivers we're talking about. I'll show you on a map in just a minute right here. Now, let me tell you something. We're going to cheat. Uh, Mesopotamia, we're going to sometimes talk as if it was a civilization. It was not a civilization, it was civilizations plural. There were so many civilizations in that area. We don't have the time to get into all of them in depth and individually. You have the Akkadians and the Assyrians and the Sumerians and the Babylonians, and so many people are in that area right there. Their cultures were similar. Many of them use the same writing, like cuneiform and so forth. We're just going to simply refer to as Mesopotamia for now. Okay. All right. Now then, so here we are. There's modern day Iraq. There's your two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. Okay, they flow from the northwest down to the southeast. Okay, right here. Which, by the way, today is a little bit of a problem because Turkey uh, has built dams up here. So you can imagine how that affects people downriver. Some places you may be familiar with, like Babylon, for example, right in there. Okay. Uh, and all this land in here was good for growing food because thanks to these two rivers, it would flood. And when they rivers carry silt, organic material, and when they flood, that silt gets left over on top of the ground. It's fantastic for growing things. Now, Over here, this area is green, not really so much because of these two rivers, but because of the rain coming up off of the Mediterranean. And in some maps, this is also green down here as well because that's your Nile River, which is same thing is happening. It floods and silt is left over. Okay. Uh, all right. Now moving on here. Okay. So here are your first six civilizations that we are aware of. You've got Mesopotamia, which again, that's just kind of a collection for many civilizations. You've got the Egyptians that you're familiar with. Over in South Asia, you have the Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization. And they were only discovered about 100 years ago. We've known about the Egyptians for centuries and centuries and thousands of years, but the Harappan civilization we only discovered in about 100, 120 years ago. So we're still learning things about that civilization, and we have not yet broken their writing code yet either. They had writing, but we can't read it. Over in China, you've got the Shang dynasty that was formed along the Yellow River, the Huanghe. And again, to the best of our knowledge, the Shang is the earliest dynasty of China, but there's definitely, they had stories of an earlier dynasty called the Xia, or Xia is how it's spelled. Uh, there is debate whether or not that was actually a true dynasty or, was that just a myth? We don't know. The Olmecs, they seem to be the oldest civilization in Mesoamerica. They developed a lot of things that later Native Americans, like the Mayans and the Aztecs, would also copy, like the calendar system, pyramid building. They had a game kind of like basketball, where there was a hoop at each end of the court. Sometimes they played it with a human head, sometimes. But they had they actually usually used a ball. They usually used a ball of sorts. Okay. But the losing team would be sometimes sacrificed. Yes. Okay. Corn. That they domesticated maize. Okay. Y'all know that maize actually comes from a small plant weed called teosinte, and they cultivated it and kept working with it until they actually got what you know of today as corn right there. Okay. And then down in South America, you've got the Chavan, which is in the area where the Incas would later live in the Andes Mountains. So if the Olmecs and later the Mayans and Aztecs were eating primarily corn, maize, along with squash and some other things, you might know what was the key crop for the people of the Andes Mountains? It wasn't corn. No, rice is that's over in Asia. It hasn't made its way over here yet.
Some sort of gourd, maybe?
No. So what? Potatoes. Potatoes. Uh, Potatoes didn't exist in other parts of the world. That was something from South America right there, and they had many varieties of potatoes. Some were poisonous too. But and the cool thing about potatoes is they could stomp them, like they put them on grass, dry grass, and just walk on top of these things and squeeze the moisture out. They could set them up and keep them, for a rainy day. Okay, moving on here. Let's see what you can do here. Who lives there? What civilization? Egyptians. Good. Okay. Who's that? Who? Olmecs. Good. Okay. Who's that? Chauvin. Good. How about that one? Good. How about that one? Indus civilization. Okay. And there? Mesopotamia. Yeah. All right. We discussed this last week. What's the answer? Good. Exactly. Okay. China, right over here. Okay. Nothing for you to write. Just take a look at this real quick here. We talked about the spice chart last week. So tell me, okay, where on the spice chart would this category go? The I. Good. How about that one? Good. Political. Good. And then this would be C, the culture. Cultural. Okay. We fall into there. Good. Okay. You can see the writing, for example, right there. Okay. Okay. So notice, just look at the first bullet right here. Okay, across the board, all four of these rivers do what? They all flood. Which one's not like the others? Egypt. Okay, and we believe that that actually had an impact on their religion, how they saw their gods. The Egyptians saw their gods as being almost like parents. Okay, the word is benevolent. Someone who's benevolent is a caring person. Okay, and they saw their gods as caring for them, unlike the people who lived here in Mesopotamia, next door in Iraq. They had gods too, kind of similar to the Greek gods in a way, in the sense that they were really just humans, but with powers. Okay, but they had the attitudes of humans, and so and they were capricious in the sense like a dog that will sometimes let you pay and sometimes will bite the fire out of you. Okay, they never knew what they were going to get, and if you notice, their rivers were unpredictable, but these rivers were very predictable. And so flooding was seen as a good thing in Egypt because they knew that would bring silt that would fertilize the soil and that would help their crops. And people didn't die from that kind of flooding because it was kind of gradual too. They knew first off when it was going to happen every year, and it was also gradual, almost like putting water in your bathtub. Whereas over here in Mesopotamia, you just might be asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden you're floating down the river. Okay, so with your livestock and everything. So people had different views of the gods because of how the environment was. Okay, time to write. So some details on technology here. Okay, so pottery, like we talked about earlier this class period, developed to store food. Plows allowed farmers to plant more efficiently. There's a word I hope you already know. The word is textiles. Textiles are cloth. And something that's going to be with us all year until we get to the Industrial Revolution. If you wanted cotton textiles, the place to go until the Industrial Revolution was India. India is always going to have the best cotton textiles. Although you might not want to wear any cotton textiles that were yellow. You know how they dyed them yellow? Urine. Urine. I'm sure it didn't smell. I'm sure they cleaned it all out, but still, I don't know. Um, Metallurgy. Okay, metallurgy. Copper is the earliest metal. Then they began to learn how to mix tin with it to make bronze. And as we said last week, iron was the best. It's the strongest. And there's one more thing about iron, though, that I didn't tell you. Um, Iron's actually more plentiful than copper or tin. You can find it much more easily. So here's the question for you as you jot that down. If iron is more commonly found than copper and tin, why didn't they just work with iron to begin with?
Because it'd be harder and more difficult to do it with.
You're right, but why? Why was it harder to work with iron? There's something about iron that makes it a problem. It's not about rusting.
Harder to manipulate.
Why would it be harder to manipulate?
Higher melting point.
There you go. Okay. It has a higher melting point, and they didn't have the technology for a long time to build a furnace that could generate the heat to melt the iron. And so, but eventually the Hittites figured it out. Money in the form of metal tokens made trade a lot easier. Before these money tokens, metal tokens, everything was done through barter. Like, I'll trade you my pig for that wood you got right there. Can you imagine going to Best Buy today with your pig to get a plasma TV set? And then you get there and they say that it's only half a pig? Let me get my chainsaw out. The wheel. We don't know exactly where it came from, but we think it probably came out of Central Asia. But the people who invented it weren't writing, so we don't know for sure. Okay, but the advantage of the wheel is it can be put, you can put it on a cart and then have animals pull it for you. And finally, water technology, hydrological technology, developed in areas like Mesopotamia where it was arid. They had water, like in the rivers, but they often needed to move it to where the water was not. And so they developed things like water wheels and canals. Tomorrow I'll show you a map, a primary source from Babylon, I believe it was, or Sumer. And you can see the canals on the map with the cuneiform writing around it, like a key. Okay, guys, we'll stop there. You have a great one. Make sure you get your chapter read for tomorrow and have your notes ready and the inquisitive's done. I'll put this on Canvas later. The ebook and the inquisitive due tonight. Okay, those are easy. Okay, if you've read the chapter, you can run through the 16 questions really fast. Say again? Yeah, it's really easy. And it's a good way to quiz yourself for tomorrow. Okay. Don't have to do them all. They're not that long either, though. Okay. All right.